Look at any crowd scene from Britain in the 1960s, and the first thing that strikes you is the sheer smartness of it all. The sharp creases, the polished shoes, the absolute uniformity of elegance. We look back at this footage with a sense of envy, don't we? We wonder where that dignity went, and we ask ourselves why we can't quite recapture that level of effortless style. But there is a secret hidden inside those photographs, a secret that the camera lens, however sharp, could never quite capture. You see, while 1960s Britain looked immaculate, it felt entirely different. If you could reach into the screen and actually feel that era, you wouldn't just feel the high-quality fabric, you'd feel the itch. You'd feel the damp cold seeping into your bones, and you'd feel the rigid, unyielding pressure of a society that cared more about appearance than comfort. Today, we are taking off the rose-tinted glasses. We are going to explore why the British really looked so smart back then. And spoiler alert, it wasn't just about pride, it was an endurance test. Let's start with the clothes themselves. To understand the 1960s silhouette, you have to understand the materials. We live in the age of soft cotton blends, breathable activewear, and stretch denim. We are spoiled. In the early 60s, the foundation of the British wardrobe was built on one thing: wool. And I don't mean the soft, expensive merino wool you find in luxury shops today. I'm talking about heavy, coarse, bulletproof British wool. For men, a pair of charcoal grey flannel trousers was standard issue. They looked fantastic, holding a crease sharp enough to cut cheese. But there was a catch. Most ordinary trousers back then didn't have a lining. Imagine that for a moment. Rough, heavy wool rubbing directly against your bare legs all day, every day. Walking to the bus stop wasn't just a commute, it was a gentle exfoliation process you didn't ask for. If you sat still, it tickled. If you walked fast, it chafed. That stiff upper lip the British are famous for, I'm convinced half of it came from trying not to scratch our legs in public. Then, of course, came the scientific revolution of fabrics, the miracle of nylon, polyester, and the infamous crimpline. They were sold to us as the future. Wash and wear, never needs ironing. And looking at the archive footage, they do look remarkably neat. They never creased. You could run a tank over a crimpline dress and it would spring back into shape. But they had a fatal flaw. They didn't breathe, not even a little bit. Wearing a nylon shirt in summer was essentially like wrapping yourself in cling film. You boiled in the bag. And in winter, they generated enough static electricity to power a small village. Every time you took off a jumper, your hair would stand on end and you'd get a nasty electric shock from the nearest ball handle. That alert look everyone had in photos, partly fashion, partly fear of the next electric shock. So, yes, we looked sharp. But underneath those crisp collars and pressed pleats, we were either itching, sweating, or sparking. If the fabrics were an itch you couldn't scratch, the environment was a cold you couldn't escape. To understand why 1960s Britain looked so layered and structured, you have to understand the temperature. Today, we live in a world of perpetual tropical luxury. We walk from a central heated house to a climate-controlled car to an air-conditioned office. We can afford to wear a t-shirt in December. But in 1960, central heating was still considered a rare and suspicious luxury, something for the very rich or the Americans. For the vast majority of us, a warm house meant crowding around a single coal fire in the living room. The rest of the house was, effectively, a refrigerator. Many of you will remember this vividly, waking up on a winter morning to find intricate fern-like patterns of ice on the inside of your bedroom window. You didn't just see your breath outdoors, you saw it while eating your breakfast toast. This domestic climate dictated the fashion. You didn't just dress to look good, You dressed to survive. That is why men look so smart in their three-piece suits. It wasn't just formality, it was insulation. The vest coat wasn't a fashion statement, it was an essential extra layer of wool to keep your kidneys warm. Underneath the shirt, there was almost always a vest, perhaps the legendary string vest which trapped warm air against the skin, or a thick cotton one that was tucked firmly into the underpants to stop draft. When you stepped outside, the layers continued. You wore a heavy overcoat, a scarf, leather gloves, and a hat. You looked like a distinguished gentleman, but in reality, you were bundled up like an Arctic explorer just to go to the post office. And let's spare a thought for the women of the swinging 60s. As the decade progressed and skirts got shorter, the weather didn't get any warmer. The rise of the miniskirt coincided with some bitterly cold British winters. Looking at photos of Carnaby Street models, you see bare legs and short hemlines. What you don't see is the sheer force of will required to stop those knees from knocking together. There was a genuine stoicism involved. Women braved the biting wind and the damp fog with nothing but a thin pair of tights and sheer determination.
This constant cold had a profound effect on how we presented ourselves. You kept your coat buttoned up tight, not just to look neat, but to keep the wind out. You kept your hands in your pockets or gloved to stop them turning blue. You walked briskly with purpose, head down, shoulders back, bracing against the elements. That posture, that upright, brisk, purposeful walk we associate with the era, wasn't just military discipline lingering in the cultural memory. It was the universal body language of a nation trying to generate body heat. We looked sharp because we were freezing. If the cold made us dress up, the sheer difficulty of cleaning clothes made us terrifyingly careful. We have to remember that in the 1960s, laundry wasn't a background task you did while watching TV. It was an industrial process. It was heavy manual labor. For most households, the automatic washing machine was still a futuristic dream. Instead, we had the twin tub. If you're too young to know what that is, imagine a noisy, vibrating R2-D2 that demanded your constant attention. It didn't just wash the clothes for you, you had to actively participate. You had to fill it with hot water, often from a hose attached to the sink. You had to use giant wooden tongs to fish the boiling hot heavy wet clothes out of the wash tub and transfer them into the spinner. It was a wrestling match with sodden wool and heavy cotton sheets. And then there was the mangle, the wringer, 2 rollers designed to squeeze the water out of your clothes, but which seemed equally keen on crushing your fingers if you weren't paying attention. Turning that handle or feeding the electric wringer required genuine physical strength and nerves of steel. And once the washing was done, you couldn't just toss it in a tumble dryer because they didn't exist. In winter, the British kitchen became a humid forest of drying laundry. We had those wooden racks on a pulley system hoisted up to the ceiling, dripping water onto the linoleum. The windows steamed up. The whole house smelled of damp wool, washing powder, and whatever was cooking for dinner. Because the process was so arduous, so physically exhausting, there was a golden rule etched into the mind of every British citizen. Do not get dirty. This is the real reason we looked so smart. We were terrified of the alternative. You treated your clothes with a reverence bordering on fear. When you came home from work or school, you didn't lounge around in your good clothes, you changed immediately. You had indoor clothes and outdoor clothes, and the two never met. If you were a child in the 60s, you know the panic of sliding on your knees in the grass. That wasn't just a grass stain, it was a crime against your mother's Monday morning schedule. A stain meant scrubbing. A stain meant boiling. A stain meant effort. So we learnt to sit properly. We learnt to eat carefully. We learnt to walk around puddles, not through them. The pristine appearance of the British population wasn't just about style, it was about risk management. We looked clean because the cost of getting dirty were simply too high to pay. But the discipline didn't stop at the wardrobe door. Oh no. If the clothes were uncomfortable, the grooming regime was an absolute ordeal. Let's talk about hair. In the 1960s, hair wasn't just styled, it was constructed. It was an architectural feat. For women, the weekly visit to the salon for a shampoo and set was a religious ritual. You didn't wash your hair every day, like we do now. Good heavens, no. You had it done once a week, and it had to last. And to make it last, you needed two things: scaffolding and cement. The scaffolding was the rollers. If you couldn't afford the salon, you did it at home. Friday night was roller night. Women would wind their wet hair tightly around hard plastic cylinders, secure them with pins, tie a scarf around their head, and then try to sleep. Have you ever tried to sleep with your head resting on a bag of hard walnuts? That was the reality. You learnt to sleep in a sort of levitated hover, barely touching the pillow, just to preserve the curl. And the cement, that was the hairspray. Gallons of it, industrial strength lacquer that formed a protective, invisible helmet around your head. It smelled of heavy chemicals and determination. Once that hair was set, it was rigid. You could walk into a doorframe and bounce off. But the fear was real. A sudden downpour, a gust of wind. It wasn't just an annoyance, it was a structural disaster. Women walked with their heads held stiffly, turning their entire bodies rather than their necks, just to protect the masterpiece. And underneath the dress, the engineering continued. The girdle. We complain about shapewear today, but the 1960s girdle was essentially rubberized armor. It didn't just smooth you out, it rearranged your internal organs. It promised an hourglass figure, but it delivered shallow breathing and an inability to eat a full meal. The moment of taking it off at the end of the day wasn't just undressing, it was an act of liberation. The men weren't entirely spared either. While they didn't have rollers, they had the tyranny of starch. Shirt collars were starched so heavily they felt like cardboard. They dug into your neck, leaving a red raw line by 5 p.m. If you turned your head too quickly, you risked cutting your own jugular. And then there was the grease. Brill cream. A little dab'll do ya, the advert said. But most men used a trowel. Hair was plastered down, slick, immobile. It looked very sharp, yes, but it meant every pillowcase in Britain had a permanent greasy patch. We look at the photos and see perfection, but behind those smiles, everyone was pinched, squeezed, sprayed and starched to within an inch of their lives. We were a nation held together by hairpins and elastic. But perhaps the strongest force of all wasn't the cold, or the starch, or the fear of laundry. It was the neighbours. In 1960s Britain, privacy was a relative concept. You lived your life in full view of the curtain twitchers. Every street had them, the self-appointed guardians of moral standards who monitored the neighbourhood from behind their net curtains. There was a pervasive, terrifying question that ruled our lives. What will the neighbours say? It was the ultimate threat. It kept backbones straight and ties knotted. You see, looking scruffy wasn't just a personal choice, it was a moral failing. It suggested you were letting yourself go, or worse, that you were common. This social surveillance meant there was no such thing as popping out casually. If you were a housewife going to the local shops to buy a pint of milk, you didn't just throw on a coat over your house coat, you put on proper shoes. You checked your lipstick in the hallway mirror. You made sure your headscarf was tied correctly, because God forbid you bumped into Mrs. Jenkins from number 42 while looking like a wreck. The shame would last for weeks. This pressure peaked on Sundays. The concept of Sunday best was absolute. Today, Sundays are for pajamas and Netflix. Back then, Sunday was a military parade disguised as a day of rest. Even working-class families who struggled to make ends meet would have one pristine outfit for every family member, kept in the wardrobe like crown jewels. As a child, the transition was jarring. One minute, you were a scruffy kid playing in the dirt. The next, you were scrubbed raw, forced into a scratchy blazer, hair plastered down and told to sit still and don't get creased. We looked like little angels in the church pews or at the grandparents' tea table, but inside we were terrified statues, afraid to move a muscle in case we scuffed a shoe or wrinkled a dress. It was a performance, a collective agreement that no matter how hard life was behind closed doors, no matter the damp walls or the tight budget, when you stepped out that front door, you presented a front of dignity. You showed the world you were coping, that you were respectable.
We looked smart because we were proud, yes. But we also looked smart because we were terrified of being judged. So, looking back at the 1960s, we have to ask ourselves, was it worth it? We have undoubtedly gained a lot since then. We have gained comfort. We have gained warmth. We have gained the freedom to walk into a supermarket in our jogging bottoms without feeling like a social pariah. We have swapped the scratchy wool for soft fleece. We have swapped the stiff collars for hoodies. We have swapped the Sunday best for the everyday casual. Physically, we are infinitely better off. No one misses the chilblains. No one misses the bleeding heels from breaking in leather shoes. And certainly no one misses the terror of the twin-tub washing machine. But do we miss the occasion? There is something undeniably powerful about a nation that, despite the cold, the poverty, and the inconvenience, decided collectively to make an effort. There was a dignity in that discomfort. It was a way of saying to the world and to each other, I respect this moment enough to dress up for it. Today, we prioritize how we feel over how we look. In the 1960s, it was the exact opposite. They sacrificed feeling good to look good. Perhaps the sweet spot lies somewhere in the middle, but I have to be honest with you, as much as I admire the sharp suits and the pristine coats of the 1960s, I am recording this voiceover wearing a very soft, very breathable cotton t-shirt, and I don't think I could ever go back. But what about you? Do you have memories of the itching time? Can you still smell the hairspray or feel the pinch of those shoes? Or perhaps you were the parent struggling with the mangle to keep your family looking smart. I want to hear your horror stories. Tell me about the scratchiest jumper you ever owned or the time you got in trouble for scuffing your Sunday shoes. Let's share the pain in the comments below. If you enjoyed this uncomfortable trip down memory lane, please do give this video a like and subscribe to the Nostalgia Brit for more stories from the days when life was harder but looked a whole lot sharper. Until next time, stay warm, stay comfortable, and maybe, just maybe, tuck your shirt in. Cheerio!